Hello everybody and welcome back to Mr. Matt's teaching channel. I hope you're all staying safe and well. We're going to be looking at our new unit today for A-level PE, which is drugs in sport. Such a very big topic, lots of things to talk about, and obviously there's lots of examples from the world of sport, so we'll get straight to it today. Looking at our learning objectives, what are we going to be learning about in this presentation, in this video? We're definitely going to be discussing the social and psychological reasons behind why elite athletes may use illegal substances to improve their performance. And we also will explain the psychological effects of illegal drugs on the performer. We'll also be looking at the positive and negative effects of taking drugs for the sport and the performer. And then we will be debating about whether athletes should be able to take performance-enhancing drugs or not, and we will also be looking at the strategies and who is trying to prevent athletes from taking performance-enhancing drugs. So we'll get straight to it. This is what the specification says. If you look on the AQA A-level 2017 specification, this is exactly what it says we need to cover. You will see here that we only need to actually cover and discuss 3 different types of drug, which are erythropoietin, anabolic steroids, and beta blockers. We'll obviously discuss the other things as well. So let's get straight to it. I've got a little video for you to set the scene for you to discuss and debate. This was taken from 2011 from a very well-known athlete who got paid for this commercial by Nike, and you will be able to see him right here.
This is my body, and I can do whatever I want to it. I can push it, study it, tweak it, listen to it. Everybody wants to know what I'm on. What am I on? I'm on my bike, busting my ass 6 hours a day. What are you on?
So interesting commercialization from Nike there. So obviously that was taken before Mr. Armstrong himself came out and said that he'd been taking performance-enhancing drugs. And that commercial was actually trying to say that obviously people were accusing him of taking drugs, but he was drug-free. Obviously, we now know that was not the case. He was an exceptional athlete, of course, but those kind of characteristics and that physicality did not come naturally, unfortunately. Okay, so now time for you to do a little task. So pause this video. I'd like you to create a little mind map. So grab yourself a piece of paper and a pen, pause this video and create a mind map of what you already know for drugs in sport. Examples, substances, who takes what kind of sports are linked to different kinds of drugs, side effects. Put down as much information as possible because we will return to this at the end of the unit. So pause this video and complete this task. Okay, so if you haven't already paused it, do so now, complete the task, and we will return to that at the end of our unit and presentation. This presentation, by the way, for drugs and sport will definitely be a 2-part presentation. There's so much content to cover and so many examples to fit into an hour will be impossible. So we will be doing it over a couple of hours, and I've got lots and lots of videos to show you as well, and lots of examples to talk about, which is one of the reasons why I actually really like the drugs and sport unit. Okay, here's one of these videos. Take a look at this.
Strychnine, heroin, cocaine, blood transfusions. At one point, all of these have been used to cheat in sports. Whether it's Lance Armstrong in cycling, Alex Rodriguez in baseball, or Russia in, well, almost everything, It's been proven time and again that athletes are willing to gain an edge in competitive sports using banned substances, even if it means risking getting caught. As long as they see that as a chance worth taking, the cat and mouse game of dopers and the people trying to catch them plays on. So here's the situation. The International Olympic Committee, or IOC, began prohibiting drug taking in the late 1960s, but because of advances in pharmaceuticals, doping has thrived since then. The most popular methods include blood doping via injections of the hormone EPO, blood transfusions, or taking human growth hormone and anabolic steroids. Russia's Olympic track and field team and its entire Paralympic squad has been banned from the Rio Olympics. This stems from the revelations of runner Yulia Stepanova, the whistleblower who outed the Russian program and whom Vladimir Putin called Judas. The World Anti-Doping Agency called for the entire Russian team to be banned from the Rio Games based on a report that said Russia's sport ministry, quote, directed, controlled, and oversaw the manipulation of athletes' analytical results at the 2014 Sochi Winter Games. And the testing won't stop in Rio. More than 50 athletes from Beijing in 2008 and London in 2012 were caught for doping years later, thanks to prolonged storage of test samples and advances in technology. Now here's the argument. Critics of the existing system say that the anti-doping crusade has failed. The World Anti-Doping Agency is cash-strapped and wouldn't have even caught the Russian conspiracy if it weren't for a whistleblower. And some say athletes should be allowed to take drugs that pose no health risks. On the other side, anti-doping supporters say that would reduce sports to a competition about who had access to the best stimulants. They acknowledge that some athletes will always look for a chemical edge, and say that in order to catch them, more support, whether financial or investigative, is necessary.
Okay, so lots and lots of points there, lots of talking points about what's actually happening in the situation. Obviously, we've got Russia, who were banned from the Rio Olympics. They were also due to be banned from the Tokyo 2020 Olympics, which is obviously being postponed to 2021. They were systematically doping athletes from their country, allegedly, and there's been lots of problems and issues which have been highlighted with the anti-doping organization, which is the World Anti-Doping Organization is WADA, World Anti-Doping Agency, but also there's doping agencies from different countries as well, which are also responsible for making sure that athletes are clean of performance-enhancing drugs. But the problems are that there's so much inconsistency around the world that there is calls for drugs to be legalized and maybe monitored, but then that would still give an unfair advantage to athletes who don't have access to those kind of drugs and monitoring situations. So there's lots and lots of problems, lots of issues. The main issue we obviously are facing is that athletes are taking performance-enhancing drugs, illegal performance-enhancing drugs, to try to gain an unfair advantage over their competitors, which is obviously not something which we would like to see in athletics. Moving on, this one just highlights the issues we face. This was the 2012 the London Olympic Games 100-meter final, which is very much dubbed the showpiece, the showcase of all the Olympics as the 100-meter final, men's track final. But unfortunately, what we can see here is just over half of the athletes involved in this particular race were or had been previously tested for performance-enhancing drugs and found that they had used them and have been banned before this race happened. So we've got Justin Gatlin here, Johan Blake, Tyson Gay, and Asafa Powell. All of those were found guilty of taking performance-enhancing drugs and served bans for that, but they were still allowed to take part in the final. So that's another question about, are the organizations, are they taking this seriously? Are the bans long enough? Should athletes continue to be involved even if they're found guilty? The bans also varied in length, so that's another problem about consistency, about how long athletes should be banned. And there's obviously other questions which we will move on to, is that these are the only people who were found guilty. There are obviously problems with people who have not been caught. Now, why did they not get caught? Was it because the drugs were completely out of their system, or were they taking a particular drug which was undetectable, which we'll talk about? So this was 2012 Olympics final, and 4 people out of the 8 there tested positive and served bans, which is a big shame. But it definitely is not the worst 100-meter final in history. For that, we have to go back to 1988, which was the Ben Johnson final. If you don't know who Ben Johnson is, it's this person here from Canada. And we'll talk about Ben Johnson in our examples throughout this study, because this particular event, this particular race, definitely highlighted the fact that drug use was widespread amongst athletes. So here we've got 6 athletes out of 8 who were found guilty of taking performance-enhancing drugs throughout their career. It was actually only lane 1, this gentleman over here, and lane 5, who were never tested or linked to any performance-enhancing drugs. Everyone else had been caught or admitted to taking performance-enhancing drugs during their career. So that was the 1988 Games in Seoul, South Korea. Okay, so let's move on to our first bit of information. Really, is what is a drug? You definitely need to know the definition of what a drug is. So it's very quick, easy mark to throw into your questions, especially for the longer answer questions. If you can straight away talk about what a drug is, then you are definitely on your way to making a good start to your answers. So have a think about that. I'll give you 30 seconds just to write something down about what a definition of a drug is, what a drug can be defined as. Okay, if you've not done that, you can pause it whilst you have a couple of more seconds. But let's find out what a drug actually is defined as for this particular unit specification. So we're looking for a substance, so anything other than food, which has a physiological effect when introduced to the body. So a substance other than food, which has a physiological effect when introduced to the body. Of course, they often also have psychological effects as well, and we will be talking about social and psychological side effects and reasons during this presentation. So there's been lots and lots of examples. It's a very hot topic, drugs in sports, and it has been for the last 30, 40 years. There's been countless numbers of high-profile athletes and teams and even nations abusing the system. So it is a big problem. It is a hot topic, and especially with Russia recently being found guilty and banned from Olympic Games, it's definitely a topic which may come up in our exam questions when we come to obviously sit those final exams. So make sure you know for this unit your examples, your 3 different drugs, the reasons why people take them, and what kind of effects is that having on the sport and the performers, and also what problems do we face for drugs in sports. If you haven't already seen a documentary, I suggest you go and watch Icarus, which is currently on Netflix. So Icarus, which is a documentary into the Russian doping. So do go and watch that and give you a good insight to what kind of things actually happened and the fallouts to that. Okay, so here are the 3 drugs that you will need to know. And again, this is a little task for you. So we've got our 3 drugs there. We've got anabolic steroids, EPO, and beta blockers. go and write down what you know about these 3 drugs. Ideally, you can add them to your mind map, which you should have already done. So I'll give you a little 30 seconds, and again, you can pause this video if you're not quite ready for when I come back. Okay, so like I said, if you're not ready for me, just press pause, and then you can come back once you've completed that. We're going to talk about each one individually and what are the effects of those as well. But what are the reasons why people are actually taking drugs? Let's have a look about why people are taking drugs.
4 years ago, we were just weeks from the spectacular opening of the London Olympics. It was supposed to be the cleanest games ever, with doping chiefs determined to catch the drugs cheats. But during the games, several athletes were caught with banned substances in their blood or urine. It was the London Olympics, our Olympics, where we experienced some of the most exciting and memorable sporting moments of our lives. But today's announcement from the International Olympic Committee that 23 of the athletes who competed here 4 years ago have retrospectively failed doping tests now leave us with more questions than answers. 265 samples were rechecked using the latest technology that leaves thousands of samples that need to be retested.
I think if you're a doping athlete and you're considering going to Rio, you're going to think again at this point. You're going to take a very serious look at yourself and wonder whether this is a risk that you want to take. And I think for clean athletes, there's more reassurance now.
These latest tests follow similar ones carried out on the samples from the 2008 Beijing Games. 31 athletes have subsequently been caught out, and that could see some of the British athletes get the medals they were allegedly cheated out of. Andrew Steele was part of the 4x400 meter team that came in 4th. In 3rd was a Russian team that is now suspected of cheating.
I think we should do is every participant at a major championships like the Olympic Games should have their sample taken, stored, and every year they know it's going to be retested for the maximum amount of years we're allowed to hold it. That's a much stronger deterrent. They'll always be looking over their shoulder. They can never rest, rather than just a lengthy ban.
Yeah. And how does this impact you as an athlete?
Well, for me specifically, I lost out on a medal in Beijing 8 years ago to the Russian team. We finished 4th in the relay in the 4x400 meters. And I'm hopefully going to find out, should it be confirmed, that I should have been an Olympic medalist all those years ago. And that's like quite a difficult situation for me to get my head around, of course, 8 years later.
Athletes like Andrew don't just miss out on an Olympic medal, they also miss out financially, and not just from sponsorship. Andrew spent the last 8 years getting into more and more debt as he chases that elusive Olympic medal. He has one last shot in Rio, hoping the playing field will finally be level.
So again, that short video has given us a little bit more information about what we need to know and be aware of, and the effects of people taking drugs. It doesn't just affect the person themselves, it affects the other participants, because obviously if they don't win an Olympic medal, not only is that going to affect them personally, but financially it will have a big impact on sponsorship deals. If you are an Olympic medalist, you're highly likely to receive more sponsorship money through commercialization deals than someone who does not. And on top of that, if we link it back to our elite development unit, then the world-class program and podium, where we're talking about athletes receiving funding if they are likely to win a medal, that certainly may be affected by people who have been cheating the system and made other athletes miss out on medals. Okay. So, what kind of reasons have people been giving in these presentations already? What do you think are the social reasons why people take performance-enhancing drugs? Okay, well, it's going to cover a lot of content here, and you definitely need to know these examples. They're going to be very, very easy marks for your long answer questions when it's talking about social reasons, which is quite often a common question which comes up in your exams. So if we can link a lot of these to this win ethic, which we talked about at the start, the very first unit we covered, which was about what sport is. Sports, generally, modern professional sports has very much a big, strong win ethic. Not all of them have a win at all cost attitude, but they have a strong win ethic. So they are under pressure to perform from many people themselves, their family, their coaches, their sponsors, their managers, and sometimes the athletes will not fulfill their expectations or will not meet or hit that level, and unfortunately, the financial rewards they will gain may be on the line and may get pulled. So a athlete may be tempted to try to do something or take something illegally to try to maintain their performance over time, to try to stay at their level or try to get back up to a level where they can compete on the world stage. If you think about it as well, an elite athlete's life career span does not last too long. They only hit their peak, over 2 or 3, 4 years period. So they try to maximize their career, and they may find it very difficult to step out of the limelight, and therefore, again, they might be tempted to indulge in deviant measures to try to win events, such as taking performance-enhancing drugs. They may do it for fame and celebrity status. Kind of just mentioned that. Financial reward. So we've got different types. There's money that can be gained from success. So sponsorship deals and commercialization, and also prize money. They may also have picked up an injury, which means they cannot train as hard, or they can't train at all. And in order to recover or prepare for a certain event, they may feel that they need to take performance-enhancing drugs to get up to that level again. Performance-enhancing drugs will definitely be able to help the athlete to train harder for longer and recover more quickly. So again, that will add to the performance of the athlete. You could say, or some of the athletes have said, that there's a lack of deterrence if athletes have got caught. And we kind of looked at that Olympic 100-meter final already. 4 have already been caught, but they were still allowed to take part in the 100-meter sprint. So, is that sending the right message to other athletes that you can take performance-enhancing drugs, get caught, but still take part in the Olympic Games? There's also a promise, or there has been many promises, and athletes have said this, that they were assured that the substance that they are taking or were taking would never ever be traceable. So they could just get away with taking it and it would be undetectable. And with the advances of pharmaceutical industries over the last 30 years, you can understand why that can actually be the case. So they can take drugs which are not detectable and won't show up on the current drugs tests, and it's only for years and years after which athletes may be detected retrospectively if they retest samples, and those samples can then be, obviously if they are positive, then the athlete would have their records erased and their medals will be reallocated, as we've just seen in the previous clip. But that doesn't really do anything for the athletes who missed out at the time, because their moments of fame and potential fortune would have already gone and evaporated. But remember that tests can be retrospective. They will take samples from major events and they can test them at the time, but they can also store them to retest as well. The other view, this is a very interesting view. So a reason that athletes have given for why they've taken drugs is that other athletes are taking drugs, and that is obviously common knowledge. And if they don't take drugs, then they're not going to be able to compete with those athletes. So they're kind of taking drugs to make it a level playing field, which is obviously an interesting method and reason and justification for them taking drugs. And the final one, the final social reason I've got for you is that there's so many high-profile cases that there's an attitude that it's actually acceptable to take these drugs within the particular sports, even though they are illegal. We're going to be looking at our first drugs then here. We've got this gentleman here. If you don't know who he is, I suggest you go and have a little research, or by the time we finished this presentation, you'll definitely know who Dwain Chambers is. So he was the fourth fastest Briton in history. He's the current European 60-meter record holder. He was also banned from the Olympics and Commonwealth Games from 2016 to 2006 to 2012 due to doping offences. Subsequently, he was allowed back in to take part in sport following his ban. Now, there's a great video here of Dwain Chambers talking about his use of anabolic steroids, which is our first drug we're going to be talking about. So just listen to what he's got to say and just think about and list lots and lots of reasons and justifications that he gives for why he actually eventually took these substances.
And was there a defining point that you decided that you were going to take drugs, that you wanted to get that extra sort of edge, if you like, on your competitors?
Well, that decision was based on me being inexperienced, being impatient, not really being the individual that wanted to wait for the results to come. You know, I was so used to being successful and winning that when I got to the senior stage where I was competing with the rest of the guys in the world that were better than me, I took it badly. So I thought, I know I can beat them, but there's something else they're doing that's not working out here. I had no proof, but I had an inkling that something weren't right.
Really?
So it just basically boiled down to a decision where my meeting with Victor, it just merely opened my eyes.
And how did that meeting happen? Did he approach you?
He approached me. We was away in Miami training, and when I told the story, I say it was like a genie. He just literally popped out of nowhere. And you hear stories about this, but you never actually believe it. And that's exactly how it happened.
Really?
Just literally popped out of nowhere with a bag in his hand.
No.
And that was that.
And what, just presented this idea to you as a way?
He spoke to me, and he explained to me that he's had his eye on me for a while. And he believes that I've got what it takes to be the next best sprinter in the world. So with an offer like that, I was just like, okay. You know, I was a bit scared and dubious, naturally. But the offer of going from number 5 in the world to being number 1 in the world, it was a no-brainer, really.
I mean, you say no-brainer, but the way he was going to elevate you to that position was illegal. So how much sort of debating did you do with yourself? How much kind of soul-searching did you do?
A hell of a lot. And my initial reasons for going to America were just to train. You know, I had no idea what kind of situation I was getting myself into. I had no idea. If I could have seen my future in the crystal ball, I would have never gone down that route. But you know, it was fun at the time, but you know, ultimately it helped, you know, ruin my career. What impressed you about him that made you want to follow this route that he'd planned? It was not something much that what impressed me. I was taken on board by him because he probably I felt as though he became more of a father figure to me. Right. Yes, I grew up with my stepfather, but it just wasn't the same. The relationship with me and him just clicked. Really? And we got on really well, and I was able to speak to him in ways I was never able to speak to him at any of my fathers, or my real dad or my stepdad. So it just helped to have someone there to speak to about my situation. And yet you knew that what he was doing was essentially wrong. So well, I knew nothing about him prior. Right. And once I'd taken that first drop, it was already too late. We was already stuck. So I then worried constantly about whether if I'd come off, what would happen to me? Would I get even slower? Because I was almost somewhat dependent upon it. Right. And I saw the results I was getting, so there's no way I could have come off. I was just already in too deep, so there's nothing I could really do. What did he say to you? Did he say you won't get caught? Well, I was led to believe that, well, firstly, he assured that what was taken was undetectable. So, you know, there was no way of us ever getting caught. So that, again, played on my mind for a while. But then after I'd passed numerous tests, then I thought, okay, I'm in the clear. So you passed a load of tests whilst you were on the stuff, and it was THG, right? How did you administer the drug? I heard that you injected it into your tongue. No, it weren't that. I ain't no junkie. No, That's
I
what
heard
was
your tongue
report.
got all fat.
Nah,
Cool.
you literally have a syringe, but it's minus the needle.
Right.
So you're not injecting anything whatsoever. You
So
just
how do you get it into your body?
you droplets under your tongue.
Right.
That's how it's
Under the tongue.
under the
I
tongue.
can see how the Chinese whispers escalate.
There you go.
Right.
There you go. And that's how it was administered. And you have cream that you put on your arm.
Right.
So, you know, the protocol that we was on was very sophisticated.
Yeah.
Things had to be taken at certain times in order to get certain results. So,
right.
But again, I was young. I was impatient.
Are you still in contact with Victor?
On an educational basis, the information I received from Victor is just mutually for UK sport and giving education to kids in schools. What
I want to understand from you is, you regret ever doing it, or is you regret getting caught?
Ever doing it. Because
really?
What I've done, I could have done naturally anyway. You know, I guess as you get older, you take a little bit more time, you become a little bit more patient. You know, you wait for things to come in their own time. I wasn't prepared to do that.
How did you feel?
What made life difficult for me was looking at people in their face and lying to them.
Right.
That felt wrong. And again, although there was a lots of smile in front of the camera, deep down inside, it was heart-wrenching for me.
Yeah.
But again, it was a decision I made, and you know, something that I ultimately regret now. But again, I'm using my experiences to better improve myself and deter others from going on the same road that I have.
A very honest interview there by with Dwain Chambers, where he's discussed lots of reasons. Hopefully you picked up on some of those justifications that he gave himself for why eventually he went down the road of taking drugs. So he said he was impatient. He wanted to see immediate results, and he was a bit young and foolish at the time. But he wanted to improve, and he wasn't prepared to wait. He also said that he felt that other people were taking the drugs themselves, and he was also believed that the drug he was taking was undetectable, which it was at the time, and it was actually named the clear THG he actually took, which is a form of anabolic steroids. So, you know, he was led down that path through a person he met, through a trainer he met, who was obviously guiding him, but he led himself down that road, and he obviously has a lot of psychological problems, which he's already mentioned about, you know, regret and the fact that he couldn't sleep. He had a lot of troubles weighing on his mind. So there's lots and lots of things we can take from this particular interview with Dwain Chambers, but please do remember that name. We will discuss him as we come along through this unit. Some psychological reasons then for taking particular drugs. We have got increased confidence. So I think that's probably number one, which is given. So taking drugs will increase confidence in particular sports, and lead you to believe that you are going to win a particular event or sport. Secondly, it might actually, the other way around, it can reduce anxiety. So if you are a particular anxious person, or you can't calm your nerves, then you can take certain drugs such as beta blockers, which are a relaxer, and they will help people or individuals to stay calm in specific sports like fine motor skill sports such as archery and snooker. It could also, again, flip the other way around. It can also be used to increase aggression. If you think about sports which require a lot of aggression, like combat sports or, for example, American football, then, you know, drugs like anabolic steroids can actually have an increase in aggression, which is obviously a psychological reason for taking it. Okay, we're gonna.
Hey there, welcome to Life Noggin. Would you take performance-enhancing drugs that could help you become an Olympic champion? What if that drug had some serious negative side effects? These drugs are banned in sports, but that doesn't stop some athletes from taking them. So what do, and how do they work? Let's start off with the most famous of these drugs, anabolic steroids. When these are taken, the body breaks them down into smaller molecules that can enter cells and bind to a structure called an androgen receptor. Normally, testosterone binds to this, but anabolic steroids can too. And from here, the real magic begins. See, once the androgen receptor is activated, your body starts to produce more proteins during the process of anabolism. The cells in your skeletal muscles start to replicate, and this means that your muscles will start to grow and you'll become stronger. In fact, in men, exercise and steroids could lead to a 38% increase in strength, and potentially even more for women. And not only that, but anabolic steroids can also help athletes train harder and recover faster by shortening catabolism, the process in which proteins are broken down into amino acids. But of course, not all the effects of anabolic steroids are positive. It can cause acne, high blood pressure, and male pattern baldness in both men and women. They can cause men's testicles to shrink and decrease sperm count, and increase your risk for prostate cancer. And women using these steroids can develop facial hair, a deepened voice, and their periods may change or even completely stop. So seriously, don't use these. But what if an athlete isn't really concerned with muscle strength, but rather wants to improve their endurance? This is where blood doping comes in handy. But again, this is a bad move. So bad, in fact, that Lance Armstrong was stripped of all 7 of his Tour de France victories and was banned from the sport for life. The goal of blood doping is to increase the amount of oxygen-carrying red blood cells in the blood. And this is usually done with either blood transfusions, using your own blood, or by injecting yourself with erythropoietin, a molecule that stimulates the production of more red blood cells. And the basic idea is that the more oxygen that can get to your body's muscles, the more endurance you will have. So does it work? Well, in one study, blood doping increased an athlete's endurance by 34%, and in another, an athlete was able to run 8 kilometers on a treadmill 44 seconds faster than before. That might not sound like a lot, but when these athletes are competing with the best of the best, every second counts. Now, these are just the tip of the iceberg. Other performance-enhancing drugs include human growth hormone, which helps increase athletes' sprinting capacity by up to 4% and increases muscle growth as well. But trust me when I say that if you are an athlete, it's probably better to just train the old-fashioned way, with a lot of hard work and sweat. Work it, baby. Excluding any of the negative health effects, using these drugs means that you're cheating. And in the professional world, that definitely shouldn't be taken lightly.
Okay, so some effects of the drugs which we are actually going to be covering were talked about there, and we'll look at the first one, which is anabolic steroids. So what do you need to know? Anabolic steroids are artificially produced in a laboratory. What do they actually do? They include THG, which we've already mentioned. So why would an athlete actually use them? Well, ultimately, they're going to increase your muscle mass, and therefore, if you've got larger muscles, then you are able to have a greater strength and power output. So strength and power. They assist with storage of proteins within the muscles themselves. They can also increase anaerobic capacity. What does that allow you to do? Well, it allows you to perform and work harder for longer before experience fatigue. So you think about if you're training harder and you're training longer, then you're going to get better long-term effects on your body. And it can also help to maintain lean body weight as well, lean body mass, as it's actually to basically allow you to include less fat within the muscles. So it's going to basically increase your muscle mass and your power output. But there are some problems as well. These are some of our examples, which we've kind of already talked about. Make sure you know your examples. You really need to bring your examples into your longer answer questions, your 8 and 15 mark questions. Definitely need to put your examples, and you need to know a couple from each drug and sport which we talk about. So if you think about these athletes which we've got on the screen, they're all kind of power athletes, all sprinters, except for this one, which is Tatiana Chinova, who is a Russian athlete who competes in the heptathlon, which is a multidisciplinary event which has a lot of power events as well. And unfortunately, Jessica Ennis-Hill here just obviously finishing behind her for this particular event in 2011, where she finished in second place and got silver rather than gold, which she should have got. Here we've got Marion Jones. Marion Jones, she was a 100 meter, 200 meter specialist. And if you just look at the definition of the muscle mass here, very, very high percentage muscle mass, highly defined in all of these athletes, which is probably down to the fact they're using anabolic steroids. Dwain Chambers here, we've got Safa Powell here, and we've got our 1988 soul man, the Canadian Ben Johnson. Ben Johnson there. So know your examples, make sure that you have got at least a couple, ideally one male, one female, so you can put them in your long answer questions. There are some side effects we already mentioned on that video. So we've got heart disease, which could obviously be fatal and lead to stroke. Facial hair growth on men and women, and deepening the voice in women in particular. It can lead to liver damage, as the body is unable to synthesize the steroids being put into the body. It can lead to high blood pressure, obviously leading to stroke as well. It can lead to increased in aggression as well, and also behavior changes such as paranoia and having psychological effects. Aggressive behavior, acne on the face as well. So there's lots and lots of side effects which you need to know about, which are obviously not positive for the person taking them. There's been lots and lots of cases about athletes who have been commonly using anabolic steroids, which have actually ultimately led to an early death through stroke and heart disease. The second drug is beta blockers. These are basically what they do is they prevent adrenaline to binding to the nerve receptors. So they actually bind to the nerve receptors themselves to prevent adrenaline actually binding to those receptors, and it allows people to remain calm and composed. So if you think about the sports which potentially could use them, we've kind of touched on them already. Sports which are going to reduce anxiety. They're actually a common drug which is used in the medical industry to treat heart disease and high blood pressure. So they can obviously lower the chance of heart disease and bring your blood pressure down. They can therefore slow the heart and breathing rate down, again to reduce their state of calmness. Can lead to vasodilation in arteries. You should already know that vasodilation is basically the expanding of the artery themselves, okay, leading to lower blood pressure. It can reduce shaking of the hands and ultimately increase precision for fine motor skills. So let's take a look at some of those sports and some of those athletes which actually potentially would use beta blockers. So these are not people, by the way, who've taken them, but these are examples of sports which potentially would use them. So any kind of fine precision events, so archery, shooting, and diving as well. These are sports which potentially could use them. If you think about diving, if they're at the top of the board, they need to remain relaxed and composed, need to find their balance, then these are sports which potentially could use them. Side effects they have, so negative side effects, so can lead to tiredness, fatigue, and ultimately a low blood pressure. And obviously if it's too low, the blood pressure, it can cause dizziness and disrupt sleep patterns as well. It can lead to a low aerobic capacity. So you may argue that side effects of taking beta blockers are not as bad as anabolic steroids, but they still have negative effects to health. And we'll give you an example of someone who got caught. So you can research this person, Kim Jong-soo. who was a 19-year-old North Korean shooter. He actually won silver in the 50-meter and bronze in the 10-meter events, shooting events at the Beijing Olympics. But straight after the event, he was actually tested, and a positive drug test came back for propanol, which is a form of beta blocker, and he was then excluded from the games. His results were disqualified, the medals were withdrawn, and he was actually, his Olympic identity was cancelled, therefore meaning that he could not compete in any other future Olympic Games. You think about, he was only 19 years old. That's his sporting career gone. Next one we're talking about, and our last one that we're going to talk about today, is erythropoietin, EPO, formerly known as. In your answers, you can actually state EPO. You don't have to write out erythropoietin, but obviously you can show your examiner that you fully know what it is and how to spell it, to give them a bit more confidence in you. It is a natural hormone which is actually found in the body anyway, but it's actually artificially produced in laboratories, and it's then injected into the system as part of blood doping. So it's produced, officially produced in the kidneys, and what it happens is it's going to increase the amount of red blood cells within the blood. So think about why that would be important for a performer, to have more red blood cells within the blood. Now the problem is as well with EPO is that it's very hard to detect because it's naturally occurring within the body. So when you do drugs tests, you can't actually detect or test for the red blood cells because they're naturally occurring. So it's a difficult one. The testers actually look at how many red blood cells an athlete has got, and there's other uses. For example, an athlete biological passport to kind of track their red blood cells over time, but it's very, very difficult to pin an athlete down who's been taking these, which is probably one of the reasons why Lance Armstrong went a long career without getting detected or caught. So why use them? So the increase in red blood cells will basically mean you've got increased amounts of hemoglobin within the blood. This hemoglobin would obviously mean that the body has a greater oxygen carrying capacity and therefore can take and deliver oxygen to the working muscles and increase aerobic energy production, meaning that more ATP are going to be produced aerobically and less harmful byproducts are going to be produced anaerobically. It's going to help an athlete to work for longer, delay the effects of fatigue in the muscles, work for higher intensity for longer without tiring. It can also help to increase recovery time because the more red blood cells in the body, the more byproducts that the body can also expel from the body to allow them to perform for longer on their return. What athletes may use them then? I think you've already guessed. We've already mentioned this gentleman a few times, Lance Armstrong, but any kind of endurance event. So this is a marathon runner here, Jet2, who was caught at the Rio Games 2016 taking EPO. So any kind of endurance events, long distance events, which are going to require your aerobic system to enhance your performance. And we're going to actually leave it there for part one. And in the next part of our video, we're going to be discussing the problems associated with the sport and the performer. So what are the consequences of taking drugs? We're also going to be looking at the problems in testing and what testing actually does and how they complete testing, and also programs linked to national anti-doping agencies such as UCAD as well. Hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure you complete your notes, and you can also start to go back to your SPAD diagram and add any information about anything we've covered today which is not on your initial sheet. I'll see you very soon. Hope you enjoyed the presentation. We'll be back with part two very soon.